Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is divert, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Abdi. Abdi, thank you so much for this suggestion. Now, let's spend a moment and review some of the definitions or ways that you can use this verb. The first way you may encounter divert can mean to cause someone or something to change course or turn from one direction to another. Now, with this first definition, I always look for real-world examples, and I saw countless examples used in connection to traffic and various forms of travel. Really common to see it used in connection to airplanes. So most airplanes make a plan, record or transmit that plan, right? We're going from point A to B, but sometimes bad weather, a mechanical issue, or something else might require that plane to change course and land at a different unplanned airport. That is exactly how the verb you'll see used to describe that action. But it also gets used with other traffic, particularly autos or vehicles. When there's maybe a bad crash, all the traffic gets routed in a slightly different direction or on a different course to allow for people to be treated, for things to be cleaned up, etc. Now, a second way you might encounter the verb divert can mean to reallocate something, especially money or resources, to a different purpose. So here, we're also talking about something changing course or changing from an original plan, but here it's how we're utilizing funds or probably the most commonly used, but it really could be any kind of resource. A third way you might hear divert used can mean to draw the attention of someone from something. So again, it's like we should be paying attention to X, but our attention is changing course to something else. For now, you should know that divert is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing, and that forms diverting. The past tense and the participle form of our verb can be made by adding ed. The base verb, divert, ends in a T sound. This means when I add the ed ending, I'm going to make an id sound, and I'm going to add an extra syllable to the verb when I pronounce it. The past tense and the participle form of the verb should sound like this: diverted, diverted. Now, there is a very common phrasal verb that you might encounter, that is to divert from. Our meanings here are not all that different than what we've discussed, but this is another opportunity to provide some examples. So, one way to use divert from is to mean to induce someone or something to change course. Here we're sort of like causing it to. So an example of this might be, traffic was diverted from the interstate while the crash was cleaned up. This is an example of the passive voice being used, right? We're not sure who is inducing this change of course. Likely we could assume it's state troopers, police, maybe other emergency professionals to, again, allow there to be time maybe to treat injured people, clean up things that might have been destroyed as a result of the crash. A second way to use divert from can mean to induce someone to direct their attention to something else. An example from this might be, we diverted the kids from getting dirty before pictures with a few cartoons. This is a real example from my life. I was just about a month ago watching my niece and nephew during a wedding weekend, and they're very small, right? They loved to roll around on the ground, but they were dressed up very nicely. So to try and keep them from getting dirty, we used a little bit of screen time to direct their attention to that and away from the joys of rolling around in the grass. Now let's continue using our verb of the day, and we'll review a couple verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the past perfect and the simple present. Let's start with the past perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about a completed action. But what makes it different than the simple past tense is that we are stressing that this particular action occurred before a certain point or before another action also in the past tense. So the verb in the past perfect is the one that occurred earliest or occurred first. You'll notice, again, we have two P's in past perfect, and that can help you remember that you will need two parts to make your verb. We're going to use the past form of have, which is had, and then we'll use the participle form of the verb. And that's what we're going to use in the affirmative. So we'll start with our subject. Doesn't matter what our subject is. We use had, and then that participle form of the verb. You can see it in my example here. The airline had diverted the Austrian flight to France due to GPS issues. So this particular action must have occurred before something else. Now, let's look at making negative past perfect sentences. To do this, you start with your subject, then use had not, and then the participle form of the verb. You can also use the contraction hadn't, and then the participle. Here's an example of that. Previous landowners hadn't diverted water in the rivers. So this is another common example with the verb divert. So remember our kind of redirecting resources. That would be an example. Water is a resource. And you can see different examples of divert, meaning like a resource was directed in a particular way. I know this sentence might not be so descriptive to understand it, but it was talking really about how the ecosystem has changed so dramatically because water is being diverted presently. And so they were also kind of taking a historical look back to explain why things were better when it hadn't been diverted. Now, let's take a look at making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, you want to start with had, then use your subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Had the advisor diverted other clients' funds before the fraud was discovered? Now, sometimes when we use the word divert, it can have a negative connotation to it. It certainly does in this sentence. So here, money maybe was intended to be used for this purpose, but now it's being used for some other purpose, and maybe one that the client hadn't agreed to, which is why we're talking about a particular kind of financial crime. Now let's move on and talk about the simple present. We can use this verb tense to talk about our habits and our routines. We can also use it to discuss facts. The simple present is a verb tense where we need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, then in the affirmative, we just use the base verb. No special endings. But if our subject is he, she, or it, then we're going to add an S to the end of this verb. Let's take a look at an example here. Our phones divert our attention from meaningful conversations and interactions. Now, some people may say this is more of an opinion than a factual statement. Others may disagree that it is clearly an example of a fact, but it's talking about taking away our attention from one thing and redirecting its course. So here, our phones is plural. That's like saying they. That's why you just see the base verb being used there. Now, if I was just talking about one person's phone, right, then I got an S there and say, like, his phone diverts his attention. Okay. Now let's talk about making sentences in the negative and simple present. To do this, again, we've got to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we use do, not, and then the base verb. But if the subject is he, she, or it, we use does not, and then the base verb. You might also encounter the contractions don't or doesn't. But what I always like to point out to my students, notice in the negative here, we're never adding S to the end of the verb. Let's look at an example sentence. The movie doesn't divert from the book. So here someone might, again, be giving kind of a factual statement as they review a particular movie, saying it really follows the course of the book, right? There aren't maybe new characters, new plot elements. It follows the story. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, we start with either do or does, whatever form matches our subject. That subject comes next. Then we use the base verb. Here's one final reminder. We're not adding an S to the end of the verb here when we make yes or no questions. Here's my last example. Do you divert from your lesson plans frequently? Here, I might be asking another teacher about her habit or her routine, right? So lesson plan is that idea of like, we're going to do this, then this, then this, right? But what I'm asking that person is, do you get off course? And there could be very good reasons for it. I would say I frequently divert from my plans. It might be based on who's in attendance that day. Might be a result of students struggling with my first activity more than I had anticipated. So we need more practice, more review. I think many good teachers divert from their plans to adjust to their students' needs. But that's a little bit of my opinion. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb divert. The first word we're going to discuss is the noun form of this word. The noun is pronounced diversion. Diversion. This can have a couple different meanings. It could refer to an instance of turning something aside from its course. An example of this might be, we've been considering a diversion of resources to focus more on research. So here, someone's maybe talking about we're going to take funds from X and apply it to research activities. But a second way you might hear diversion used can be to refer to any sort of activity that diverts the mind from rather tedious or serious concerns. It's another way to talk about recreation or hobbies, pastimes. Those can all be related. So an example of this might be, what's your favorite evening diversion? So it's asking like outside of work, outside of maybe really difficult mental tasks. What do you enjoy doing? Another word you might encounter is the adjective diversional. This can be describing something that provides diversion, recreation, maybe some kind of amusement. So it's really connected to that second definition of our noun. An example of this in a sentence might be, diversional therapists work to enhance older people's lives in aged care homes, mentally, spiritually, socially, and physically. So this is a relatively new type of role that many long-term care facilities, senior care organizations are utilizing for some of them several dimensions of health to create greater wellness amongst their residents. Related to this is another adjective. It's diversionary. This means, or we're describing something that tends to draw attention away from some principal concern. An example of this might be, you may need some diversionary tactics with a fearful dog. So this sentence is describing that we need something to draw the dog's attention away from the scary situation or the thing that's causing the fear. Thanks again to Abdi for suggesting today's verb, divert. I thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.